Welcome to our media briefing. We had a nice media briefing last night after floor time and talked about tax reform. There might be some lingering questions to that. We're addressing House bills today and passed all the budget bills. I think the House passed theirs. So now it's last thing to do is a cleanup bill on the last night for the budget. Otherwise, we're moving ahead financially for the state. And education got fully funded with growth, public ed, and a 4% WPU. So it was a very good year for them. And our state employees and higher ed employees got a nice increase in their wages also.
What's the
increase a little bit? The higher ed and state employees.
Yeah, I think we did 2% and then 1%.
For dedicated areas that we have issues in the state that we're below where we should be as far as funding, or as far as levels. It's very interesting. You get, an animal as big as we work with here, you get areas that, I shouldn't say neglect, but positions become popular, and you create positions where people aren't funded properly or not taken care of properly. And so we directed some funding that could be used to leveling that playing field and making sure we keep the good employees that we have.
So when you say that, who gets that extra money?
Well, the corrections will get a big piece of it.
Okay.
But there's money available for managers of all our departments to make corrections, market corrections, to help them make sure that we maintain a level of employee.
So you don't bleed employees from the state?
That's correct.
So Department of Corrections gets money. Who else gets extra money, that discretionary money to keep employees?
Well, we hope a lot of what we've done with WPU flows to the teachers.
Okay.
Once it leaves here, you remember that goes out to the locals, and they make those determinations on what kind of increases go to teachers. So, but really there should be some funding every place to make those kind of corrections.
Senator Maine, don't you have a bill that gives extra money to DABC employees?
I do.
Where's that at?
I do. It's in the House.
Okay.
It's in the House and well deserved, as you know. And so there's it
gonna
has.
Pass?
Pardon me?
You think it's going to pass?
Sure.
Well, I mean, but is that wishful thinking or reality?
It's going to pass. It has other things to it. It has some money for technology. It has some money for credit card fees. So there's other things involved with that. But it's going to pass. Right, boys?
I have alcohol people to the left of me and alcohol people to the right. And here I am stuck in the middle with you folks.
Let's talk about alcohol. What is the status of the reform bill that Senator Stevenson you are co-sponsoring?
It's moving forward. There will be a couple of minor amendments that we will make on the floor. We're in the process of taking care of those now, but.
What are those amendments?
Move ahead. I think you're going to see maybe a slight adjustment to the proximity issues that we've dealt with. I think, and there's one that we're working on that would allow, if you were in, let me just give you for instance, if you're in a strip mall and you had a church that was located in that mall, and you had a restaurant that had been there forever.
Like Cinegrill?
That's probably a great example. That they would not be able to meet the proximity issue, and so when the Cinegrill decided to sell, they would lose their grandfathering. And we're going to tie in a few instances, and I don't think it's a lot across the state, but there'll be a few instances that we would tie that license or that type of operation to, it would be tied to the real estate or tied to the business in perpetuity if the business changed hands.
So you're going to tweak again the buffer zone?
That's correct.
What are you looking?
Not
are you
the
going
buffer zone.
Oh, you're not going to tweak
the buffer zone. No, I'm talking the proximity.
The proximity to churches or schools or community locations.
1,000 feet, 500 feet, whatever.
What about the buffer zone? Is that going to stay? The 10-foot?
I have not had the opportunity to talk with the House sponsor We chatted for a minute on a lot of other issues dealing with the budget, but we haven't talked about the alcohol bill.
But
I'm sure it will come during the day sometime.
Personally, I think.
today or tomorrow?
Oh, I'm sure him and I will discuss today, I'm sure.
Okay, but tomorrow, I mean, what other amendments are you looking at then? So you're looking at community proximity, what other things are
You
going to
know,
tweak?
I don't think there's, if they are, they're just tiny tweaks or some corrections. We've got one spot that it was pointed out to me by a lobbyist yesterday that, you know, by practice in the state of Utah, you can buy wine at a table. It can be poured for you at a table, or you can have a bottle at your table. And there's some conflicting places in the code on how that's handled. I don't know if we'll get those fixed this year or not. If we don't, there'll probably be a minor tweak next year. You know, I've made this statement before, good alcohol policy, good any policy, takes sometimes a couple of years to establish, and I'm sure this will be looked at a year from now.
Is it likely this bill is going to, do you have the votes to pass it through the Senate and get it done?
I think so.
And do you expect, and are restaurant associations happy with it? Are they cool with what you've done?
They were all happy last Friday, but these things are, alcohol is fluid, let's put it that way.
Like
We've all
Jack-
been here too long. You're all very
Like Jack
punchy.
Rabbit's on a flatbed truck.
Tip your waitress then.
Further questions?
I have a question for Senator Stevenson. I wanted to know, did you know from the start of the prison relocation process that the new prison would cost $650 million and not $550 million?
Well, let me back up, I'm gonna kind of clarify that. The prison is going to cost $550 million. Our problem is that where it's located, we've got a large piece of infrastructure to put in. Now, some of that infrastructure that we're putting in will be used by other entities. A lot of private entities, when they build, they will go to Salt Lake City and they will get a permit. And in that process, we'll be refunded back part of our investment in that infrastructure. So it's really two pieces. You've got the $550 million to build a prison, but then you've got the infrastructure piece, of which part of it will come back to us over a period of time.
Okay, so.
And that's what this new bond is for the infrastructure piece.
Okay. So at the end, it will come down to 550. It's
Well,
just a matter.
we don't know that we don't know whether we get all that back. We know that we're gonna get a portion of that back, and there's still negotiations going on with Salt Lake City and other entities. Certainly there will be some big businesses located out there, and there will be some money come back to refund replenish the state with the money it invested in infrastructure.
Okay, but did you know from the start that it might cost this?
Well, we know there's a big infrastructure piece to this, any place we went with it. And when we started this process, I think we're into this year 4 now, or maybe 5. It's a little bit like alcohol, it's very fluid.
Yeah, one thing we do know is the costs are going up, and that's one of the reasons why we're bonding this year for highways. But we're seeing those costs go up, and if it doesn't get built soon, the costs will go up, because if we're seeing that type of inflation in building materials. So the idea is to get it built, and to get some of these roads built.
Is there concern about just how many bonds you've got going right now? You've got prison, you've got highways. I mean, you guys are doing an awful lot of bonding for some, and these are not cheap bonds.
We actually looked at that, and right now, and where Jerry probably knows this, but we've been up in the 85% of our constitutional debt limit. Even with all the bonds, we'll probably be close to 45%.
So it's not
So we're
too
way down.
much.
No, it sounds like a lot, but we're staggering the highway bonds, and in other words, doing a part each year. So, and I think the actual bonding bill requires, President, I think what we stay under 50%.
Yeah, we were concerned about that, and I think it's a great comment. And so we put in the bonding bill that UDOT's authorized to issue those bonds as long as we don't go beyond 50% of our constitutional bond limit.
One thing you might want to remember as we bond is that we authorized the bonds with the bill that we passed today and with the highway bond, but that doesn't mean we did not borrow that money today.
Mm-hmm.
That money is borrowed over a period of time, and over the next 3 or 4 years, the state of Utah will continue to pay off bonds in large tranches on existing bonds, and we really probably won't borrow any more in one given year. We'll still be able to assume a downward trend, except we will start to draw on the prison fund that we created. We haven't taken any money on prison bonds, yet that money was authorized 2 years ago.
Talk a little more about the $100 million prison bond. Is that restricted just to the infrastructure issues, getting the road, getting utilities to the prison, or can it also handle the additional cost of that site preparation?
It can handle the additional site cost, but let me clarify something. If we would not have bonded that $100 million this year, we could have used the existing bonds that we have and bonded 3 years from now. We just felt it was better to have this in place, let everyone have a look at it, and we're not, I would much rather do it the way we're doing it than in the spring $100 million bond out 2 years or 3 years from now, because that would look like we had a shortfall. So if we spend our prison money today on infrastructure and then had to have money backfilled to build the prison, I think that's got a pretty bad optic attached to it.
I wanted to ask, just very briefly on liquor again, not your liquor bill, but the what is expected to hit the Senate floor this afternoon, the Dui lowering. Thoughts from the majority and minority parties on this bill that would lower the blood alcohol legal limit to .05?
It came through my committee, and I voted against it. I think, and my colleagues will choose to do. I think it catches people in, and I think people that have a couple beers or whatever that ratio is, I think people that are going to be trapped into it, and that's how I feel about it. We would be the only state and that does this, and they had comments in the committee about other countries that have a lower level. Well, those other countries, those kids are drinking at 16, 17, 18 years of age. Their age is lower. We have a higher age. And so I took that into consideration, but those things will be vented, and everybody will have their say and whatever the vote is. But I think that's why we have legislation for discussion. So we'll see how that goes.
Those other countries just need a DABC, right?
That's right. That's right.
Senator Adams.
We heard testimony from the vice chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board. And the issue is not an issue that we thought of in Utah. And it's not a Western issue, it's not an Eastern issue. The National Transportation Safety Board, they investigate all the crashes. They're in Utah now investigating the airplane crashes we've had. They're a very professional organization. They've spent a lot of time studying countries that are real remote, a long ways away from us, like Canada, and that have .05, I think in everywhere but Quebec. And they've looked at Australia, they've looked at all the countries in Europe, and they study what actually affects drunk driving, because they're concerned because our road fatalities are creeping up. And that is a big concern, and I think there's over 3,000, I got it right, maybe it's higher than that, but it's when we add up the numbers, it's got to be higher than that, because it's 747 crashing every week, as I've talked about before. And the highway fatalities, a percentage of those are drunk driving. And so in their study, they said, what will actually curtail it? So they looked at a lot of different things, but when you go from point A to 0.05, it reduces the drunk driving in all the areas they looked at, meaning those that are not very intoxicated and those that are totally lubed, because people have a different mindset about driving. And she thinks it'll save as many as 65 lives in Utah, 1,100 lives nationwide, and spots like Hawaii that are not very, we talk about tourism and the effect it'll have. They're looking at doing it. Washington State's looking at doing it. The study's new. It's just barely been completed. And so I think you'll see other states actually look at it also. So
Think it's going to pass this afternoon? Is there the will in the Senate?
I'm
think
the
so.
Senate sponsor, so I'm working it pretty hard. We'll see.
Look at this.
Do you think you got the,
And see, we went to the same committee, so you have two different opinions on that. But I think the conversation needs to go back to other things, the opiate, the overdose. In Salt Lake County, 11 people die a week from overdose, from opiates. That's just from opiates. So, I mean, we have multi-fields of addiction and issues too. I'd like to, if the president will allow me, I'd like to go back to the transportation bonds. We can't grow. You can't have businesses if we don't have transportation to get the workers and the companies there. It's out of balance. So that's why we invite companies to come in here. We have to have the means and the infrastructure to make that work. And I sat on, with my colleagues, the relocation of the prison. It is the very best place. It's going to be a boom for Salt Lake City. The companies that need to be away, trucking companies, those big manufacturing companies that need to be that by themselves, they will hover around there. And there's growing pains for any place we would have gone, and we looked at that for a long time. So it is the best place, and the infrastructure around will be built, and Salt Lake City will have a boom from those industries that choose to be there.
doesn't that kind of put you at odds with your own caucus? Didn't they oppose the prison relocation to Salt Lake City?
Some do, some don't. And we have an open caucus, you know, everyone chooses where they are. Some are homed in Salt Lake City. I'm homed in West Valley. So we all have different visions, but we all have the same vision for the best for our communities. So there's no discourse in our caucus.
Senator, I mean, one of the issues with choosing the Salt Lake site, though, was the infrastructure, the additional infrastructure cost because of the condition of the soil out there, and now, you know, this additional cost that you're bonding for now. Did that give you pause then, and does that give you pause now, knowing it's probably going to cost taxpayers considerably more, having chosen that
Well,
site?
we had, and the good senator led our band, and Representative Wilson, and all those things were into play. And we would have had issues with any place that we looked at, there was issues. And we were at the consensus that it was the best place.
So some of the other sites, one of them was out by Eagle Mountain. The infrastructure costs there, I think, would have been more, personally. I don't know what the soils were like out there, whether they were collapsible soils or not, but I deal in this in my personal business, and just bringing power in, sewer, water, you know, at least this site's a little bit closer to those sources of infrastructure, but we were kind of starting from ground one out there in Eagle Mountain. It would have been, you know, I'm not speaking definitively on this, but I'm just looking at the different sites that we looked at, and all have infrastructure issues. And the further you get away from sources of power, sewer, water, all those necessary utilities, the greater the cost. And I think one of the reasons why we picked Salt Lake, it was closer to those infrastructure issues, but there's another infrastructure that we also need to talk about, and that is closer to your courts, closer to medical care, on all those issues, which will save money in the long run by locating it where we located it.
And to speak to that is the workforce. We had to, the workforce, their pay is not extravagant, and if we needed to put that in the scenario of how far are these people going to drive to go to work. And so that we thought about the employees too. If we put it someplace so remote, it would we couldn't get the workforce there, and it'd be so expensive for them to drive. And so that was in the mix also.
And remember, we also have an asset that is being planned as part of the Point in the Mountain discussion that we're having now. The Draper property is an asset for the state, and I think that will generate some revenue, mostly one time at some point. And we can't sell it now. We've got to build a prison. We've got to make a move. And then hopefully we're very thoughtful at that time and protective of that asset so that we get the most money out of that asset as possible.
The prison side was very open and transparent. They picked the right side. And Senator Stevenson did an unbelievable job.
Senator Wilson, or Representative Wilson. Yeah.
A long process.
Yeah, any other questions?
Anything new on the demise of the tax deal last night? I know the leadership had a meeting this morning. I'm just wondering if you're already talking about how to go forward during interim on this?
Yes, we are actually, and so we had a discussion about this in joint leadership today about what we're going to do in the interim. The management committee will decide that at some point, but we had a discussion about some of the data that we had looked at, and so we're going to have revenue and tax, maybe the transportation committee, look at some questions that we have and come back with recommendations in the fall that will, hopefully steer some of the discussion we have going forward. And so, yeah, this is not a dead issue. We are going to face some, they're not overcomable, but there are some crossroads budget-wise coming upon us, and the sooner we can address those, the better off the state is going to be.
Interesting interim items coming up this summer. It means job security for all of the reporters and all the folks.
We'll try to keep it interesting.
And we have fun having everyone here. It's
Yeah, we
a good
do.
discussion. We like
Yeah.
the transparency
Good
and
discussion.
to make sure we're discussing those issues with the media so that they can send it out unadulterated, right? So thank you.
Appreciate your interest.
Any questions from our viewers? Thanks for being here today.
Thank you very much.